and welcome to Unsilenced. I am here with Mollie this evening, who has agreed to sit down and share some of her experience with the VCUG test. Mollie, do you want to jump in and tell us who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, so I'm Mollie. I'm 22 years old, and I'm from Buffalo, New York. I started getting VCUGs at age 18 months. After I had a kidney infection that landed me in the hospital. After my first VCUG, I was diagnosed with grade 2 VUR, and they didn't think my case was operable, so they opted to have annual VCUGs instead. So I had them, I think, every year until I was 4.5. I'm a little unclear on how many there were, somewhere between 4 and 6. Just because most of my records were destroyed. I only really have evidence of the very last one happening. And that one was negative, so I knew that there's definitely some before that. In 2006, when I was 4.5, my VUR spontaneously resolved. So I was able to stop getting them, thankfully. I remember being in the lobby of the building, and I remember walking up to the lobby, looking around, and it was all adults in the waiting room. I didn't see any other kids, which felt very isolating and just made me even more nervous. And I, at the time, didn't really know why I was so nervous. And at that point, they didn't allow my mom in the room anymore. They only let her in for the first one, so I went back alone. Only memory I had as a kid was being in the room and feeling them insert the catheter, which was just this extremely sharp pain. And it's weird because it's not a memory that's first person. It feels like I was in like the corner of the room watching myself have it done. And as a kid, I didn't know what that memory was. It was like a 2-second long memory. And I never really asked my parents why I had it done because I was really afraid that pushing further would not only cause me to have to face this, but also might lead to me getting it again. I don't really remember a lot of the medical staff from any of my procedures, but I have spoken to my mom for the one that she was there for when I was 18 months old, and I'm told that the vibe in the room was very lighthearted. My mom was like telling jokes with the medical staff and they were all laughing. And she said that like I was very resistant to the procedure. And so it was a very long procedure because I refused to void on the table, which just delays the test even longer. And so she said that all the nurses were running around and like running water, and she said that everyone else in the room had to pee except me. It was very lighthearted. It wasn't probably that way for me, but I know it was for everyone else in that room. And the ones I had later, my mom wasn't present for, and I have none of the medical records. I also had mine done at several different practices. A lot of uncertainty about what happened.
Honestly, a lot of survivors have mentioned that their medical records were lost or, ruined.
I was always under the belief that the United States kept your medical records your whole life and that they wouldn't destroy them until your death. And when I found out about this, I was 19 and a half. I reached out to the place that I knew I had at least one done and asked for my records. And when they gave me their records, there was nothing before 2018, which I was way past the age, and I was a little confused, and they said that they destroyed my records when I turned 19, which was 6 months before I found out about this. My partner and I have been together for 4 years at this point. We had been dating for about 1.5 years when I found out about this, so there was 18 months that was a lot of confusion. Basically how it started was I always kind of suspected that I had vaginismus from a very young age. Like 12, 13, it was just like very obvious to me that I had a definite fear of my genitals. I was very against using tampons. It was becoming more and more clear the older I got that something was definitely wrong. I went to my gynecologist. They told me I did not have vaginismus at all and that I was perfectly healthy, and that they said that I would be able to have a very normal sex life and that nothing would go wrong. So I very naively believed them over myself, which led to a situation that was basically the first time I tried, and every time after that was just like, well, I definitely have vaginismus. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I definitely have it. There's no way I don't. My doctors at the time still tried to kind of gaslight me into believing that I didn't have it. And it definitely put a strain on my relationship, because not only did I feel like I wasn't good enough to be loved and that I couldn't contribute to a relationship what I was supposed to, but it also made him feel insecure about himself and be afraid of hurting me and of being the one that's causing that pain to me. And so it took us about 18 months. For most of our relationship, he suspected that something had happened to me as a kid. He said that it was kind of in the back of his mind that I probably was sexually assaulted as a kid, and that I either didn't tell him or I just didn't tell anyone. And it became even more clear. I had my friend in college psychologically analyze me, because it was like, why am I having these issues? I had a lot of really concerning behaviors. I talked to her for like an hour and a half about this, and she told both my boyfriend and I, who were in the room, and she was like, Mollie, have you been like assaulted as a child? And I was like, no, that's crazy. Like, I had a normal childhood. Nothing ever happened to me. I have no recollection of any assault. And she said, there's really not much else that it could be. All of your symptoms point to the same thing, which is childhood sexual assault. So, was it something maybe you don't remember? And for me, it was like, I couldn't even talk about it at that point, because I didn't want to think about that possibility that had happened to me, and I didn't even remember. So I just kind of pushed it off. And a year later, I found out in our shared apartment, my mom had texted me that I had kind of confided in her with a lot of these problems. She had believed that the VCUG may have been the cause, and that I became noticeably very afraid of my genitals right after the exam, and that I specifically wouldn't let any doctors near even my waist area. They would have to hold me down just to examine me. And so after that, I looked it up online, a lot like everyone else, and I found a whole lot of articles about how safe it was and about how harmless and risk-free it was. And it was just this feeling of like, I don't understand, because it's saying that it's safe and that nothing happens and there's no risks. And then I'm having all these problems and they don't match up together. And I eventually found the original support group, and reading those stories, it kind of like clicked into place for the first time of like, this didn't probably happen to me, this definitively happened to me, and this is what's causing all of the problems in my life. And that was really hard for both me and my partner to kind of handle together. In a way, it was very relieving, because it's the answer we had been searching for so long. But in the same regard, it was like a delayed trauma reaction. I just kind of pushed it down for most of my life, that when I finally started to face it in our shared apartment, it was kind of really bad for a while. I was finally processing it for the first time all at once, something that a week before I had no idea had even happened to me. It took a lot of trial, a lot of patience to get to where we are now, which I feel like we're in a much better place together, much like mentally healthier, physically healthier, and we have a much more healthy relationship in the way that we support each other, and have gone through our struggles with like my vaginismus and all my trauma. And he's been there the whole time, holding my hand at every doctor's appointment. He's been there every step of the way, telling me like, you can do it.
It's just such a powerful just testament to how broadly this can impact your life, and not just our life, but the lives of the people who love us, our partners, our spouses, our boyfriends and girlfriends. Would you mind sharing a little bit about how you think the VCUG might have impacted your childhood and or the way you viewed your parents, or any beliefs you had about yourself?
The VCUG definitely impacted me very much as a child. Before I started having them done, my parents described me as very adventurous adventurous, willing to try anything, anytime. I was always the kid that would, I'd order like the pizza off the kids' menu and I'd be eating my mom's food and she would have to eat my pizza. I was always the one that wanted to go on big roller coasters. I was willing to do anything. After the VCUGs, I became very anxious, very withdrawn, very afraid of my surroundings. And it impacted my relationship with my friends. I don't really have a lot of long-term friendships. I have a lot of trouble forming long-term bonds just because having a lot of trauma means having a lot of trauma responses that, especially at the time, I didn't really know how to handle. And so you handle them inappropriately and it causes you to lose a lot of friends. It definitely hurt my relationship with my parents especially because my mom was there for the first exam and I was so young that rationally now, it's like, well, I was getting a medical procedure. Like, of course my mom was there. But as a kid, it doesn't feel like that. It feels like something horrible is happening to me. And the person that I love the most, the person that's caring for me my whole life, is standing 5 feet from me and not helping me. It feels like abandonment in a way. And that's not my parents' fault because my parents were not told the truth about this. They were told that I would completely forget and that there was no possibility that I would ever remember or have any long-term effects. In their shoes, I would have made the same decision given the information that they had. And it was a time where, cell phones weren't smartphones. You couldn't just Google things. And it was like my parents weren't going to go to some medical library to look up studies. It definitely hurt my relationship with them in a way that I wish it hadn't, but it kind of did break a lot of the trust we had together. In terms of how it made me feel about myself, pretty bad. A lot of my childhood, I kind of internalized it as being my fault. Especially when everyone around you is telling you that, like, oh, this had to happen, and it's not that bad, like the pain isn't real. It makes you doubt yourself a lot and think, oh, well, if this isn't my parents' fault and if this isn't my doctor's fault, then it must be my fault for whatever I did to have this done. It really hurt a lot of my self-esteem and it destroyed my mental health very quickly. Especially because following the procedure, I had a lot of medical problems, unexplained medical problems. It's a really common trauma symptom. And so it was like I was constantly in and out of doctor's offices and hospitals trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And every single time it was the exact same answer, which is there's nothing wrong with her. She's making it up. She is just dramatic. It's just her anxiety. And it kind of makes you doubt yourself a lot because you learn to not trust what your body is telling you. And it definitely made me very depressed as a kid. I lost a lot of my childhood to depression, which was absolutely crippling for most of my life. I was suicidal at the age of 8, and that continued until my 20s. Every day was it felt impossible to go to school and to pretend to be okay. I had no idea why it was happening or why I felt that way, but I knew that something was wrong with me. And because I didn't know what it was like, well, it must be me. Something is wrong with me. Like, this is something I did. This is a fundamental part of myself that's just incorrect, that I should get rid of. It definitely did not make me feel very good about myself. And it took a really long time to rebuild that relationship with myself because in a way, it's like I really lost that mind-body connection. And so my mind is in one place and my body it doesn't even trust myself because I never learned to trust anyone.
Thank you so much for, honestly, all of that. You touched on some really crucial points, especially the part about, as a kid, you look around trying to figure out the source of the problem. If there isn't a source, then it has to be you, and that's completely rational, and that applies to the whole, yeah, my mom was with me, but in the moment, something horrible was happening, and she didn't save me. That's what the kid sees. And I think that perspective is just so, so invaluable, especially now as we're trying to get this message out to healthcare professionals in the healthcare community,
Mhm.
where would you suspect that this disconnect might be coming from, in the sense that these medical organizations promote the test as painless when, you're speaking from experience that it was incredibly painful? Those little misunderstandings, where do you see that disconnect lying?
I think it's on a very big scale. It's a fundamental problem that is in every single aspect of the medical community, from the people that own the hospital down to the people performing these procedures. I think it's taught in medical schools that it's not painful, and so they believe it's not painful. And it's also a belief that children don't experience pain the same way adults do, and that they don't experience emotions the same way adults do. And so a lot of the time, when you're a kid, you're not believed as easily as if you were an adult saying the same thing. Because when you're a kid, you're really vulnerable. And it's easy to just say, stop, you're okay, you're just being dramatic, like this doesn't hurt. It's especially easy to say that when it comes from a lot of people who have not been on the table. Every single time I had that test, there were other people in that room, and they would probably tell me that I'm either a liar or that I just misremembered it or that I'm crazy, but they weren't the ones on that table. They were next to the table. And if I was in their shoes, then I might feel the same way. But because I was on the table, I can tell them a very different side of the story, which was that it was just absolutely horrible. I think it's an extreme problem gone all the way up to the people that own the hospitals, because their main goal is profit. And the VCUG test is extremely profitable because VUR happens to a lot of kids, and VCUGs happen to a lot of kids, especially in the United States where medical care is so expensive. A lot of these tests having done start to generate a lot of money. And so when there's a lot of money coming in, there's no incentive to stop. And a bunch of kids telling you it hurts isn't going to be enough to outweigh the money that they're receiving. Those are the same people that fund a lot of medical programs where they teach that it's not painful. And those doctors go on to perform the tests and tell kids, this isn't painful. You're scared, and you're just reacting because you're scared.
What has been the most difficult part of your healing journey?
I think the most difficult part of the healing journey is just being able to admit to myself what happened. Because I feel like I found out when I was, 19 and a half. And so that meant that I went nearly 2 decades burying this memory and telling myself that it didn't exist, and that all of my problems were because of my own faults and because I was just an anxious person. Finding out, it took a long time to even admit to myself that not only did this happen to me, but this happened to others, and this is a very real thing, and it wasn't something I was just making up or a memory that I fabricated. It was a real, tangible event that happened, and especially one as just terrible as these VCUGs are. It's weird a lot of times because I feel like I can separate myself and I can research the procedure and write about it almost from a perspective as an outsider, like, oh, I didn't have this done, so I can write about it. But then at times it's like reading through the steps of the procedure and just hearing like people's stories about it. It makes you be like, oh, that's sounds really horrible, and then it's like, oh wait, that happened to me. I never want to feel bad for myself. I have a lot of trouble giving myself any grace, and so admitting that something terrible happened to me is something that wasn't easy. It's a lot easier to say that something terrible happened to all these other people than it is to say it to myself. That's definitely been the hardest part of this, is just trying to come to terms with it. I also feel like I searched so long. I searched everywhere for an answer to these questions of why I was having so many problems as a kid. And it's like, now that I have an answer, it's like, this is what I've always been looking for, but this is so much worse than I thought it would be. I guess it's relieving that I know, but it's also like I have to face this, and I have to face the reality that this is still happening and that I can't stop it. And that every day that goes by it's just happening over and over again. And there's just nothing I can do to stop it right now. Because that's what I would love to do, is just break into the exam room and stop.
Right. That's like the thing we replay in our heads, it feels like. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The advocacy side has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to have been very helpful for you.
I think advocacy has been a positive and negative experience for me. It's been really positive in the fact that I feel like I'm making a difference. And it's been really rewarding to speak with all these survivors and hear their stories, because it validates a lot of my experiences. And also, a lot of the times, a lot of the work I do is trying to find survivors, because I feel like a common theme among us is that, like, I like to think of it as like a puzzle. And some people have a couple pieces, some people have the border, and some people have all but one. My job is kind of finishing the puzzle and saying, this is what happened to you. It's nice to speak with them after and hear them be very grateful for me for telling them. But it's also a very negative experience, because you do have to hear a lot of very traumatic stories that are very similar to yours. And also, not everyone is very accepting of this. And I feel like I'm at a place where I can't tell my story, and it's not a problem for me. And I liked telling my story because I feel like it's a fundamental part of who I am and how I got here. And the people in my life I want to tell, because I want them to think about that when they're interacting with me, and knowing that some of the things I do are because of that. But at the same time, not everyone understands. And because this took place in a hospital by doctors, it meant that it wasn't as bad as we think it is. And a lot of people say that it's not bad, that it doesn't cause sexual trauma, that it doesn't cause any trauma, that they shouldn't list it as a risk, the psychological trauma, because it's just going to scare people away. Hearing those things over and over again is a little difficult at times, because I think what these people forget is that we still went through this. And even if they don't believe it's real, it has a massive impact on our lives.
Yes, I could not agree more with that. People cannot comprehend how far-reaching it is.
I think the thing that's helped me the most is talking about my vaginismus, because I know a lot of people say that they don't think that this test causes sexual trauma because the nature of it isn't sexual, but for me, it did cause sexual trauma because of the fact that now I am terrified of sex and terrified of intimacy. And my vaginismus is a huge symptom of that, in that, you know, I've had my anatomy checked. There's nothing anatomically wrong with me. There's nothing, you know, physically wrong with me that says that I should have vaginismus. And I haven't had any events that should point to this except for the VCUG. It's the only thing I have that points to it. And what also helps a lot is the fact that, you know, vaginismus is a medical condition. It still has a lot of stigma around it, which doesn't always help, because some people also don't believe vaginismus is real. But it has helped a lot of people see that, like, this has like a real impact on my life. I have spent thousands of dollars and hours of my time trying to fix this issue, trying to make it better for myself. And that means, you know, that's all because of this test. And I know it's because of this test because a lot of the times when I'm dilating, when I'm in physical therapy, when I'm trying to work on this, I start to have these panicking thoughts of like, oh my God, like it's in like my urethra. It's like reminding me of a catheter. I feel like I'm back there. If my legs are too far open and I start to think about like the position I was in during the test, it's the same thing. It triggers those memories of like, I am just overwhelmed with this horrible fear of like, someone's coming for me, something's gonna happen to me, I feel like I can't move. I mean, absolutely, the vaginismus is 100% caused by this VCUG. There's nothing else that it could be.
Yeah, because like ordinarily obviously your friend thought of this too. The first thing that comes to people's minds when they hear stories like this is, sexual assault or sexual abuse, maybe in early childhood. And just the fact that you can lay these symptoms side by side and be like, they're the same, says a lot, you know? And I'm glad you brought up the sexual nature of the procedure, because we have a study that literally quotes in the literature, many children experience this as a violent rape, especially girls. I guess I'm curious if you'd have anything to share about anyone who might question the validity of that due to the lack of penetration.
Heard that a couple of times, that because it was the urethra, that's not the same kind of trauma, but the sexual trauma is any part. It's not just the vaginal canal. It's also the anus. It's also the urethra. It's also other parts of your body. You can get sexual trauma without anyone even touching you. It's a very rigid definition when they say, oh, it's just this one thing. And it is known to cause vaginismus. It's one of the causes of vaginismus. And it's vaginismus mostly affects the vaginal canal and the pelvic floor muscles. Those are all kind of together. The pelvic floor muscles are not just surrounding the vaginal canal. They're that entire part of your body, and they can impact everything down there.
Yeah, no, it's literally it's the only thing keeping everything in place and everything functioning. Have you ever shared your experience with medical professionals? And if so, how were you received in those moments?
I have shared my VCUG experience with all of the medical professionals I see now. Before, I didn't tell any of my doctors. I was very afraid of how it would be received. The first person I told was my therapist. I told her about it, and her reaction was shock and horror. And she was like, Mollie, I think you may be onto something. And she's like, this may be something that we need to start asking people about, because if this is impacting a lot of people and they don't know it, then we need to be taking a more active role in telling people. I really trust my therapist, and she recommended my gynecologist that I currently see. She's a nurse practitioner, and I specifically went to see her because I've seen, I think, 3 to 4 gynecologists before her. They either would tell me that I didn't have vaginismus, or they would tell me that it was caused by a lot of things that don't make any sense. Oh, it's because you don't love your boyfriend. It's because you don't trust your boyfriend. It's because he doesn't know what he's doing. It's just because you're anxious and you're thinking about it too much. And they would give me these solutions, and I spent 2 years not even knowing that there was a treatment for vaginismus, because they told me that the treatment was pushing through, getting really drunk, and turning off the lights. I mean, just ridiculous solutions that would never work. So my new nurse practitioner that I see specifically deals with trauma patients. And I started to tell her about the VCUG procedure, and she stopped me and was like, she's like, Mollie, I have several patients who have the same trauma. They've also been through the VCUG procedure. She's like, I've seen a wide array of responses to it. She said that she's had those VCUG patients go on to, have children that she's birthed, and some decide not to, some decide to, but that she's seen several patients with it, which honestly shocked me, the fact that she even knew what it was. After that, I told my physical therapist, who hadn't heard of it before, but when I explained the procedure, she was like, yep, that is probably what caused this. This is probably why you have vaginismus. That makes a lot of sense. And then the last person I told was my psychiatrist. And when I told him, I thought that he would have a similar reaction, that he wouldn't know what it was. But he told me that he knew exactly what I was talking about, and that they had taught him in medical school that these procedures are traumatic and that they can have really long-term effects, which shocked me a little bit. I guess that was one of the most shocking things. I kind of expected every medical professional that I told to be like, oh, I've never heard of that. I have no idea what you're talking about. But a lot of them were immediately were like, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. You're not my first patient. You're not the first case I've seen. I've known about this for decades. And that was really surprising to me, because I've seen 50 specialists throughout the course of my life. And I have made it a point to tell every single one of them that I had kidney reflux as a kid. And for kidney reflux, there's really only one test, and it's the VCUG. If someone has kidney reflux, more likely than not, it's probably a 98% chance that they had the VCUG. I had all these trauma symptoms. I saw dozens of specialists. I told every single one of them I had kidney reflux. None of them said anything to me. Not a warning, not a hint. But when I brought it up, the majority of medical professionals knew exactly what I was talking about.
That is I legitimately have chills right now. That is so sinister to me. Girls like me and you fought for decades just to figure out what this was and how it affected us, and now we are spending time and money and energy. We are sacrificing our relationships with loved ones just to function and lead like a full quality of life, or as full as it can be, right? Why on earth aren't these people being vocal and at the very least acknowledging it publicly?
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple other survivors about it, and one of the most hurtful things is, it's not that this procedure was done to me. I'm not really that upset that they gave me life-saving care, because I did have VUR, and I'm not mad that they did it, but I'm mad about the way that they went about it, and I'm mad at the lies that they told my parents about it, because they separated me from my parents. They didn't exactly, treat all the kids with care. I know that they don't treat a lot of other kids with care, so I have no idea if that's how they treated me, but I do know that they lied to my parents, and that hurts a lot more, especially when you talk to professionals and they know what you're talking about. It's a feeling of like they knew. They knew before I had the test. They knew after I had the test. They have known my entire life, and they actively chose to not tell me. And so I had to figure it out and put all the pieces together. And that meant that my treatment was delayed decades because I was not told the truth. And had I been told the truth, then I could have gotten help when I needed it, which was as a kid. And instead I went all those years thinking that it was me that was wrong. And now when you're an adult, it's a lot harder to unlearn those bad behaviors than if you were 4.
Yeah, even the simple act of being able to trust yourself, to trust what your brain is telling your body and understand that and be in control. Like, it wasn't just a childhood we were robbed of. We were robbed of so many adult abilities. We were robbed of adult health. The impacts have been phenomenal, at least in my life and in the lives of others I've spoken with. What would your future look like ideally, and what would that closure look like?
I think my hope for the future is to heal as much as possible. At this point in my life and with the people that I've spoken to, I don't think that I'll ever heal 100% from this. And, my therapist always tells me that you can be over a trauma and you can be healed and feel good about it, but it didn't mean that it didn't happen to you. And so, my hope is just to be as good as I can be, given everything that's happened. And that also means that, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm not going to be as good as I could have been, but that I'm going to be my best damn self that I can be, no matter what that means. Just trying every day. And closure for me, I wish it had been speaking to the woman who did my exam. I actually reached out to her a couple of months ago. I only have proof of, the one VCUG and her name was on it. Reached out to her and said, I didn't say anything mean. I didn't accuse her of anything. I just said, I want to ask you questions about your time as a radiologist. And I saw her, social media pages, and she's this old grandma who loves her grandchildren, and she bakes for them and she knits these things for them. She seems like one of the most wonderful grandmas that you could ask for. But at the same time, she, in a way, gets to go off and have that wonderful life. And I can't exactly have that life because of her. And so I want to be, have closure. And I wish that it had been through speaking with her, but all she said was that she's retired and she doesn't do anything like that anymore. And so it's hard. I wish that had been the way I got closure, but sometimes in life you don't get closure like that. And so for now, I think what's going to be the most healing for me is the more work I do towards bettering this procedure for future kids, because I can't go back and stop my exam from happening. If I could, I would. And I can't undo all those years of hurt, but maybe not only can I be there for, that 14-year-old girl that's wondering what happened to her and why she's so broken, but maybe I can also help all those 18-month-olds and 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds that are about to have this procedure and maybe I can help them have a better experience so that they can go on to have a happy, healthy life that I can't necessarily have.
That was so beautifully said. It's almost like coming to terms with like a lifelong sentence sometimes. And it's like, well, it's not the death penalty, but it's not that great either, you know? And it's really hard to like reconcile with that.
I like the statement that it's not like a death sentence, it's just like a life in prison kind of sentence. It's definitely hurtful to know that, like, as a result of this, I'm at an increased cancer risk, and I have a huge chance of passing this on to any children. I can't receive any gynecological care. I still have a lot of the effects from the trauma, and these are things that are going to follow me for the rest of my life, and there's nothing I can do about it. You know, there's a lot of quotes that help me through the healing process, and one that's always stuck out to me that it's like I'm so emotional about is just that it didn't have to be this way, and we don't have to be here, and that it could have been much different had the medical community as a whole listened to the Goodman study back in 1990, and it didn't have to be like this, and it shouldn't be like this. Those stories on the original Reddit were what helped me a lot to know that not only am I not crazy, but that this has happened to other women, and that there are other people out there who are living basically the same exact life that I am. And I'm not alone anymore. And so now it's like I want to be that for other people because I know that that's what helped me so much.
Yes, that Reddit saved my life because it's just true. There's nothing else on the internet. I was already so suicidal after finding out for obvious reasons. You spend 2 decades of your life wondering why you're suicidal, and then you finally get the reason, and it's like, well, that made it worse. So just finding that community, like, as horrifying as it was, it like seemed to glue my pieces back together and like hold me together long enough to take that step. Would you say you had like a similar experience when you did finally connect with other people?
When I first found the Reddit, I was in a very bad place, in a place that I wasn't ready to talk to anyone about this. But reading through the stories there, it almost felt like I was dreaming, because it was like, this is so scarily similar to the life that I'm living and the same problems that I'm having. Every story I read, there wasn't a doubt in my mind that this isn't what happened to me. It was so obvious. And, you know, I found out about this. I found the Reddit 2.5 years ago. It has been a while. I wrote so many posts on that Reddit and then just immediately deleted them as soon as I posted them, because it was like I was almost ready to share my story, but I also didn't want anyone to hear it. I just wanted to write it and then be like, oh, delete. You suggested the Zoom meeting that we all get together. It was like, I felt like I was in a place where I was like, okay, like I can connect with people now and I think I can do this. And then about 10 minutes before, I was like, what am I doing? This is crazy. I'm just going to go home. I guess I was afraid that the people I met on the call were going to be just better than me. And they were going to be just in a way that I wouldn't be able to connect with them. And that they would just be this group that I don't fit in with again. But as soon as I joined, and there were only 4 of us really that first day, which definitely helped. As soon as I joined and the more we talked, it was like, I think this may be the first group that I do fit in with, because these women that I'm speaking with, they're the first people in my life that I've been like, yeah, they know what's happening. They know what I'm going through. They fully understand this in a way that nobody else is able to. I'm so glad we had this community, but I wish that none of us were here.
Right. I feel like that's the common thread we keep repeating to each other is like, so great to see you, so glad you found us, so sorry you're here, but nice to meet you. Yeah, I relate to your comment about, will I even fit in with this group? Because the Zoom idea started, it was almost a joke I made to my husband. I was like, I'm just so mad for us. Like, let's just throw everyone in a Zoom room and we can like start to fight, you know? And I'm like, it's probably gonna be a bunch of people, like all these different ages, like maybe most of them would be guys, I don't know. Just to like open up a Zoom room and just find like stunningly beautiful, sophisticated, like articulate women who are just so kind and empathetic, exuding the qualities that in a way I've been looking for a long time. My gosh, I was honestly shocked. For some reason, I still am not sure why. It just didn't seem real after so long. It's like, well, it was here the whole time? Are we sure?
Yeah, it was in that first meeting, I felt like I was having a good time just connecting with you guys, and I feel like it was really easy with us. And at the end of the call, it was kind of this feeling in me, and I think it was felt by you and the other members as well, of just like, okay, like, I thought this was a problem before, but now that I'm here, we definitely have to do something about this, because I'm talking to these other people, and it's very clear that this is a huge problem that is, still affecting people. And now that I know that there's other real people and not just, Reddit people, it's like, well, these are actual real people with real jobs and real relationships. Yeah. We got to do something about this. I can't sit by anymore and do nothing.
Yeah, I was really attracted to that energy in you. I think from the get-go, like before I even knew who you were, like your real name, I was like, oh, Stinky Dog knows what's up. I like this. Let's keep going.
I don't even know how I got the Stinky Dog name, to be honest. I think I just thought it was like hilarious.
It's the only Reddit username my husband remembers. He's like, oh yeah, Mollie's Stinky Dog, right? I'm like, yes.
It's so weird because in that first meeting, you're like, what's everyone's Reddit names? And I was like, oh my God. I'm like, I hope everyone else has really weird names. And Ashley was like, oh, mine's Ashley
G.
I'm like, no, I can't follow that
up. So you mentioned, obviously, there are other women out there who are either just now finding out about this procedure or remembering something that triggers the memory or finding out the name for the first time. What is the one piece of advice you would provide for these women who are going through this initial stage?
It's the piece of advice that I wish had been told to me. You have to be okay with how you react to the procedure and to the news. You may not like the way you react. You may not want to be angry and sad about it, but you have to be okay with it and know that, something horrible happened to me and there's no correct way to deal with this. And I can't just move on like it was nothing. And so I'm going to process it the way that myself wants to process it, the way that my brain and my body want to process it. It may not be what I want to do, Mollie, my subconscious, but it's what is going to happen anyway. And you just have to be compassionate towards yourself and say, it's okay to not be okay right now. I'm proud of myself and who I am, and I'm okay with what's happening, and I'm okay with the fact that I'm not there where I want to be. And, I still have a lot of slip-ups, and that's okay. And I just have to forgive myself, even if I'm mad in the moment. It's like, oh, why would you do that, Mollie? It's okay because something horrible happened to me, and all of my reactions are understandable given the context of what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is so central, especially because I feel like this procedure truly can set us up for continued abuse in terms of setting healthy boundaries and people pleasing. It's especially important to be able to do that for yourself so you can get that from others. And those who are unwilling to give that to you, you can walk away from without spiraling. Really, really, really great advice.
I know that it's, the medical community isn't perfect. It's never been perfect. And they have made a lot of mistakes all throughout history with just huge fundamental misunderstandings of the human body and how it works. I'm trying to recognize that and be okay with the medical community because I know that I, still have a human body and I still need medical treatment, and I'm going to have to be okay with them and trust them enough to let them help me. But at the same time, I feel like a part of me will never forgive the people that were involved with my procedure and the people that still perform this. And I feel like part of the reason is just that at the end, they're there to do their job the same way that we all go about our jobs. And they go home to their families and their houses and they can forget about the day and just enjoy their lives. But for me, I will never forget that day. And my body will never forget that day and like how it impacted me. And so it's like I can't forgive them because I can't go home and pretend that this didn't happen. I was failed by a lot of the doctors in my life. And it was at my most vulnerable time where I didn't have a voice to speak up and say that I was hurting and that this happened to me and that I was traumatized And I feel like that they should have known better. They should have protected me more, and they should have done more so that I didn't have to be where I am now, because it genuinely felt like I was alone, and I was almost begging these doctors to help me. And it felt like they were turning around and just saying, no, we don't care. There's nothing wrong with you. Get over it. And I just feel like I was just failed by so many people. There were so many people that could have stepped in, and they didn't. For that reason, I'll never be able to forgive them. I understand that they're people that make mistakes, and that they, I believe anyone can change, and I hope they do change, know that this was a mistake and try to be better and learn from it, but I still can't forgive the mistake they made to me, because now I live with this the rest of my life, and I will suffer every day the rest of my life as a result of this. And that, to me, is not worthy of forgiveness. And I still consider myself an extremely forgiving person, but I can't get over this. And if I can't ever get over this, then I can't forgive you for allowing it to happen to me. It doesn't mean that I hate them, or that I wish harm upon them, or that I think that they should have to go through this as punishment. It's kind of like I understand that they didn't have any malicious intention, but at the same time, the impact it's had on my life is severe in a way that there is no forgiveness to be given anymore.
Well, that, and a lot of time has passed in terms of they could have changed this procedure for quite some time now. But the other side of it is, in a way, you're still stuck in the same box they forced you into as a child, which is no one believes you, no one listens to you. I mean, we've been running this organization for months now, and it's crickets, I feel like personally that's why I'm angry. It is a life sentence. There's nothing I can do to go back and undo it for me. But the fact that it still happens, I know that when I first Googled what this was, there was no doubt in my mind that it was not performed anymore, because just reading the breakdown of the steps was horrendous. And I was shocked just to find out it still happens. Is that something you felt as well when you learned that it's still the gold standard?
Yeah, that was pretty horrible to learn. Not only is it still being done, but it is still being done a lot. And that not a single thing has changed since I had my procedure done the first time back in 2003. I mean, it's been 20 years, and it's still just not any better. I feel like I'm not even sad anymore, and I'm not angry anymore. It's just the only emotion that I have left is just disgust.
Yes.
It's disgust that this is still happening. It feels like I stumbled upon a huge gap in the medical system, and I'm trying to, frantically wave my arms and say, "Hey, it's right here. This is a huge problem. We need to be focusing on this." And it's like I'm being told, "Yeah, we know.
We'll get to it later," or
yeah, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. And it's just like, you need to listen to us. You need to listen to those kids, the ones today that are telling you that this is wrong. It's undeniable that this procedure has really detrimental long-term effects. It's undeniable that this is an extremely traumatic procedure. It does need to be performed, but by this point in history, we should have alternatives. We should have better sedation. We should have better medication. We should have better procedures. And we should have more empathy towards the kids that are going through it. I've heard so many stories of the medical staff being horrible to the kids. This procedure on its own is horrible. And on top of this, some of the doctors are they have no empathy for these children. And they are just calling them liars. And that's not right at all. And it should not still be this way. And it should not be performed this way. And the fact that it still is a little shocking, because I've always had at least a little bit of trust in the medical system, and this feels like it's gone. I have no trust, because how can they continue doing this with the research, with all these people telling them it's wrong, and they keep going. Like we didn't say anything.
Yeah, and the fact that there are several alternatives already available. However, the reliability has been comparable but not superior until, I guess, a couple years ago, possibly longer, when CVUS, it's been established as an even more accurate alternative that does not involve radiation, which is the single risk, ironically, that these hospitals are telling parents. It's like, oh, well, the only risk is ionizing radiation, but, it's super low risk, and your kid will be fine. So the irony that there is a safer, more cost-effective, less traumatizing means of doing this that would save families on average like $800. That was when a million more red flags like popped up in my brain, even though I didn't think any more red flags could exist.
Feels like every day I learn something worse about this procedure.
Yeah.
It's like I'm always like, oh, it can't get any worse. And then it's like, that's terrible. It's even worse than I thought it was. And it continues happening. Where I am right now is that if the medical community, if they don't want to inform parents about the true risks of this procedure, then I will, and we will. And so, my big question to them is, who do you want these parents to hear it from? Do you want it to hear it from their trusted doctor? Or do you want them to hear it from us, breaking all trust you have with them?
Whenever I talk to you, I just feel like we're the same person sometimes.
So often with everyone in this group, I'm like, you guys mean?
Right? It's like, are we all social justice warriors? Okay. I thought I was the minority, but okay.